Tov. So today's daf yomi is Gittin Ayin Aleph Gittin 71. Amarav Kahana Amarav. So on the top of 71a, Rav Kahana said in the name of Rav, let's see if a cheresh, let's see if this person is not able to hear, but sheyachol adaber, but he's able to speak mitoch haksav. He can't hear or speak the way we normally understand speaking, but he can speak by writing. So Rav says, Kosvin benosnin get ishto. So then he can write and give the get to his wife. That's okay. This writing is like speaking. So I'm Rav Yosef, my kamashmon. What's Rav really teaching us? Tanina, didn't we learn this in our Mishnah? Nishtatek ba'amrulo nichtov get ishtocha. Let's say a person wants the ability to speak, and we say to him, should we write a get for your wife? The Hirkin Barosho, and he nods his head. Both can also him. We check him 3 times. If he nods his head in a way that shows that he knows what we're saying, no to no and yes to yes, then we write the get and give it to him. So what's Rav even teaching us? So that's Rav Yosef's question. So I'm only Rabbi Zera. Elim Ka'amris. No, here Rav is talking about an Elim. And so Shani Elim, Ditanya Medaber, Ve'enu Shomeo, Zeo Cheresh. Shomeo Ve'enu Medaber, Ze Elim. Zev Ze'arein, Kepipchan L'chol Devrayim. So Rabbi Zera says, well, it's not 100% clear if Rabbi Zera is challenging Rav Yosef for not understanding the what the chiddush of Rav is, or if he is really raising a new point that Rav's position shouldn't be correct. But it seems like he's defending Rav. So he says, Rabbi Zerim says, this is a different case. This is a case of somebody who is our mission was talking about somebody who's just not able to speak. In that case, is different because medaber ve'enu shomea. We went to the Bryce. So somebody could speak but not hear. That's called a cheresh. Shomea ve'enu medaber. Somebody who could hear but not speak. That's an elam. Zev ze'arein kepikchem l'chol devrayim. Both of them are going to be considered like they're pikchem, like they're of sound mind. And so therefore, Rabbi Zera says, of course, that what Rav is saying is absolutely correct. And the Gemara now interrupts. It says, "Umimai the medaber ve'enu shomea." How do we know that the definition of an Elam is somebody who can't speak and a cheresh is somebody who can't hear? Because it says in the verse, Vani kacheresh, it says in Psalms, I'm like a cheresh lo eshma, I don't hear a Elam, well yiftach pev, or like a Elam who doesn't open his mouth. Bayis Emra, or alternatively, or like people say, Ishtakal milulia, my words were speaken. My words were taken. Rash says, Elam ta'amr shani Elam, that this is what is Rabbi Zera saying? He says, the kiman d'shomeo, since he could hear, that an Elam is fundamentally different. Our mission is talking about an Elam. So since he can hear, he's like complete pikeach. But the cheresh that Rav was talking about is different. Because he doesn't hear and he doesn't speak. So were not the fact that he could divorce her by writing, then he would be able to, she wouldn't be able to leave. So Rashi says that Rabbi Zera is saying back to Rav, if he wouldn't tell us this because he can't, he wouldn't have been able to speak at all. He wouldn't have been able to say anything. But it's not 100% clear. What's the difference then between writing and nodding your head? But Rabbi Zera seems to be saying back to Rav that there is. So I'm a Rabbi Zera, ikashuli, but if you have a problem with Rav's statement, hakashuli. This is my problem with Rav's statement. Then Rav Kahana said in the name of Rav, Titanya im lo yagid pratla ilaim she'enu yachol hagid. Amai hayachol hagid mitoch haksav. It says about Shvuas Eidos, that's a carbon shvu. If a person says to a witness, you know testimony about me, and the witness says I don't, and he swears falsely, and then he admits it, so he has to come and bring a korban. But the Brisa says this doesn't apply to somebody who was unable to speak. He was a mute. So such a person doesn't bring the korban. But if Rav is correct that you could testify, that you could give the get via writing, why do we say that it excludes somebody who can't speak? He could have written down his testimony. So the Gemara says, no, there's a very big difference between Shulas Ha'edus and giving a get. Edus Ka'amras, testimony. Shani Edus, by testimony, Torah says specifically, they need to speak it. There, we don't allow writing, and so therefore it's a fundamentally different case. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, so we're going to challenge Rav's opinion, that we're going to challenge the opinion of the Brisa that somebody who's not able to speak can't give testimony because the Torah requires a testimony to be actually speaking. So the Gemara says, "Ma'isvei kashem shepot k'nosol Gittin, kach pot k'nosol masos matanos u'edios u'yerushos." That just like we could test the person for a get, see if he nods his head, so too we could test him for business and testimony and inheritances. But it says specifically katani mias edios. We test him by nodding his head to see if he's able to give testimony. So how can the Brisa say that by testimony you have to speak it? It's not, you're not able to give other evidence. So no, that's only talking about the case of testifying that a woman's dead. There, that a husband is dead, so a woman can remarry. The rabbis were lenient in that case. Gemara says, "Vakatani Yerushos," but it also mentions inheritances. And aren't we there talking about to testify that this is this person's inheritance, and we're allowing it without actually verbally saying something? No, that's testify. That's by the firstborn son, not testifying, but giving up his rights to the firstborn inheritance. Gemara says, but it also says about business. Isn't that talking about business in general? That if a person wants to testify about something, he could do it without speaking. Gemara says, no, it's talking about his own testimony. He's saying the masav matan for his own business, meaning to say that he wants to buy this or not buy this. Gemara again challenges that. If you have a person who's a cheresh, you're not allowed to follow his hand signals or his movements or his handwriting or his writing, except for by movable objects, but not by Gittin. So this is a question on Rav Tana in the name of Rav, that says you could divorce via writing. Gemara says, okay, you're right. You know what? Tanai, it's actually a dispute amongst the Tanaim. The Tanya, we weren't in the Brisa. We weren't in the Brisa. But Medvar Mamurim, that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, when do we not allow you to divorce by writing? If a person was a deaf mute from the outset, a cheresh from the outset, if he was originally able to be a pikeach, he was of sound mind, and then he became this charesh, then he can write and they can sign. And so therefore, that would be what Rav is talking about, a pikeach ben this charesh. That's what Rav says you could give a get. The Gemara says, v'cheresh meikaro. Well, you mean to say Rashbag says that if he was originally a cheresh, he can't give the get through writing? But why don't we say kashem shekon tzibur miza kach matzibur miza? Just like he married her through the hand signals, he should be able to divorce her through the hand signals. Gemara says, you're right. If it was his own wife, that's indeed what we would say. But here, what we're talking about is vimto. It's not a woman who he married from the outset. It's a woman who felt him from his brother's widow. Gemara says, vimto miman. How is she his yavama? If his brother was a cheresh and then she became his yavama, well, then why don't we say kashem sheknisasa baramiza kachetziasa baramiza? Just like his brother married her through the hand signals, so too he's divorcing her through the hand signals. So it must be we're talking about a case where his brother was a pikeach and then he died, and she falls him through yibum, so therefore he can't divorce her under these circumstances because he's a cheresh meikara. So Gemara says the same or alternative answer. No, actually, it could even be a case where his brother was a cheresh, but we don't allow it, even though he married her through Ramiza, but because we make a decree that if we're going to allow him to divorce his brother's Yavama, if his brother was a cheresh, he might come to divorce her if his brother was pikeach. Well, the Gemara says, well, then if he marries his own wife through Ramiza, he also shouldn't be allowed to divorce her, because maybe he'll come to divorce his brother's Yavama when he was a pikeach. So the Gemara says, no, Yavamto be Yavamto nechafa. We would come to confuse his pikeach Yavama for a cheresh Yavama for pikeach Yavama, but Ishto be Vimto nechafa. But we're not going to come to confuse his own wife with his brothers who was pikeach. So the Gemara says, "Do we really make such a decree that that we're not going to allow him to divorce his brother's his yavama from his brother was a cheresh, because he might come to divorce his brother's yavama from a pikeach? But didn't we learn on top of Ayin Aleph on the base, Shnei Achen Chereshin? Let's say you have two brothers who are Cherashin, and they're Nesuin Shtei Achios Pikachos, and they're married to two sisters who are Pikachos. O Shtei Achios Charashos, or if you have two sisters who are Charashos, O Shtei Achios Achas Pikachos V'Achas Charashos, or you have two sisters, one's Pikachos, one's Charashos, Chen Shtei Achios Charashos, Nesuos O Shnei Achem Pichin, or if you have two sisters who are Charashos married to two brothers who are Pichin, or you have two brothers Charashin, or one brother is Pikach, one Charash, or then because you're married to the two brothers are married to two sisters, they didn't do chalitz or yibum because one brother is not allowed to marry two sisters, so therefore they're automatically exempt from chalitz and yibum. But if they were not related, then he does do yibum with them. And if he wants to divorce them afterwards, then he can divorce them. So, because we're going to say that the asi, Rashi says, the asi get cheresh, the get of the cheresh comes and uproots the zikas kedushin of the cheresh, and it uproots the kedushin of the cheresh. So we see from here, this price is proving that where we allow him to divorce her if she falls to him from her husband who was a cheresh, and we don't say, oh, we're not going to allow you to divorce because maybe he was a pikeach. So therefore, it's mechavarta kedushanina meikara. So we go back to like we learned earlier, that what we're talking about is that she fell to him from the brother who was a pikeach, and under those circumstances, we're not going to allow the divorce. So the Gemara then says, and that's why, because since he is a cheresh meikara, but he didn't marry her from the outset himself, because then he would have been allowed to divorce her. But she felt him from her husband who was a pikeach, but he himself was a cheresh meikara, so therefore he's not going to be allowed to divorce this woman. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says not necessarily the case, because it's possible chalukino of chaver v'rashbag. Rabbi Yochanan says that maybe the chalukino of chaver v'rashbag. So let's look at Rashi says this. That few pikeach ben ischaresh eno yachol agarish. That Rashbag says that if he was a pikeach and then became an ischaresh, he could divorce her. But the Rabbanan, the Chaver who argue with Rashbag, they say even in that case, even if he knows that right, he can't divorce her. And so therefore, don't say that Rashbag is explaining the position of the Tanakama. So, because here Rabbi Yochanan is saying that Rashbag is arguing. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. So Amar Abaye Afana Nami Tamina. So Abaye says we also learned this in a brisa that there are people that they argue to Rav Shimon Gamliel that even through Ksav you can't divorce her. Why? Because it says in the brisa. Because it says in Yevamos the following. Let's say she was nishtes. Let's say the woman became insane. Lo yotzi. You're not allowed to divorce her because there's nobody to protect her. So you can't divorce her because she's going to be insane on the street and she'll be abused. But nistare shu o nishtate. But let's say he's the one who became a cheresh, or he's the one who became insane. Lo yotzi olamis. He can never divorce her. Now, what does it mean when it adds the word olamis, that he can never divorce her? Isn't it coming to tell us, according to the Chachamim, who argue with Rashbag, even though he knows that divorce through writing, he can't divorce her? And so this is against the position of that Rav Kahana said in the name of Rav. So that's what it must mean, that they're arguing with each other. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Papi, Lav Dashmina Rabbi Yochanan. If we're not for the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, who says that Rashbag was arguing with the Chachamim, I would have said that Rashbag is not necessarily arguing with the Chachamim. Havamina Rashbag of Ferushay time with the Tanakam Udas, and the Rashbag is not necessarily arguing with the Chachamim. That when Rashbag says that what are we talking about? Pacharish Mikaro, Pikefon Ischarish, that he can't write it, I would have said that that's the position of the Chachamim. Why? Because what would I have said? I might have said, my olamis. I might have said, in this case, he can't divorce her. Afagav the chazino e decharif. Because even though in this case we see that he knows what he's talking about, he looks like he's bikeach. I would say he's still not allowed to divorce her. But through remiza, but through writing, he would be able to divorce her. Or inami could do Rabbi Yitzchak, or else like Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak, I might have said that it's the contrast with the case of the woman. The Var Torah showed them miskareshes mididave apikechas balkarchav matamro ena miskareshes shloina haguba minag hefker. I might have said like Rabbi Yitzchak. Now, what does it mean? I'll read the Rashi. When it says olamis by the man that he can never divorce her, I might have said that's like Rabbi Yitzchak, meaning to say that when it says olamis and the Reisha, it doesn't say olamis. I would say because in the Reisha, it's the position of the Rabbanan like Rabbi Yitzchak. And the Seifa is the Oraisa, that meaning to say that when it comes to divorce her, we require that the man has sound mind. And so biblically speaking, you can't divorce her. But by a woman, the only reason why she can't divorce is not biblical. It's just because of Rabbi Yitzchak that we don't want to allow the woman to be mistreated. And so therefore, biblically speaking, she could be divorced, but what's the reason why we don't allow her to be divorced? Because we don't want the people to be treating her in a manner of hefker. And so therefore, Mishnah says in the first clause, lo yotzi, and then in the second clause, lo yotzi olamis, to tell us that it's only biblically speaking that the man can't divorce her if he's a cheresh, but rabbinically speaking, the woman can't be divorced if she's a shota. So the Mishnah says, Amrulo, let's say you say to a man who's, let's say a shliv mara, or he's healthy, and he has no children, and we want to make sure his wife doesn't end up as a yavama, we say to him, should we write a get for your wife? He says, yeah, write it. And he says, write it. Amru was so fair. They said to the scribe, Vikasav, and they went to the scribe and he wrote it. And then they went to the witnesses and they signed it. Even though they wrote the get and they signed the get and then they gave it to the husband, and then v'chazer v'nasnula, and then he went back and he's the one who actually gave it to her. Already get batal. We're going to say that in this case, the get is not qualified. Why? Because he has to say to the scribe to write it and to the witnesses to sign it. So basically, since he didn't say directly to the scribe to sign it, to write it, and to the witnesses to sign it, therefore, the Gemara is going to discuss how we learn this Mishnah, but therefore, since he didn't say it directly, it seems that it's not going to be valid. So the Gemara explains, what's the reason why it's not valid? Time at the Walmart to new, because he never said to give it. He never said give it. Since he said write it, it seems to be he told these people to write it. He didn't tell other people to write it. So therefore, what's the reason why this get is disqualified? Because he just said because he didn't say give the get to my wife, but he didn't just say give it. He said write it, and so it seems from his words that he's being very specific that they have to be the ones to write it, and they shouldn't say to somebody else to write it because he's embarrassed from the fact that he doesn't know how to write. So that's what the Gemara seems to be saying. Taima, what's the reason why it's no good here is the lo amar to new. He didn't tell them specifically to give it. So he says write it and give it, and so therefore they didn't have the ability. And so therefore they didn't have the ability to ask somebody else to write it. So therefore the Gemara says ha'amar to new. But if he would have said to them write it and give it, and they would have asked somebody else to, then that would have been acceptable. Meaning to say, if he had said, this is how Rashi says it, if he had said, give the get to my wife, but he didn't say write it, they would be able to say to other people to write it, and they could have given it. Because it must be Rashi says, we're talking about a case where they were a bezdin, because if it was two, and even Rabbi Meir would admit that they would need to write themselves. But here, there was three people there, and he said to them, give it, so therefore, they would be able to under those circumstances. So that's how Rabbi Meir, so money, who is our Mishnah like? Rabbi Meir accused, says the Amar Mili Mimser L'Shliach, that because they have the ability to appoint somebody else, because it's not clear that he's being precise here, that he's saying, I want you to specifically write it. He's just saying, give it, so they could ask somebody else to write it. But the latter clause of the Mishnah states, but the latter clause of the Mishnah says, he has to say to the scribe directly to write it and to the witnesses to sign it. So meaning to say that the agents can appoint somebody else. Also, Rabbi Yossi, that seems to be following the position of Rabbi Yossi, who says that an agent can appoint somebody else. He needs to be the one to appoint them directly. So Reisha is Rabbi Meir. The Reisha follows Rabbi Meir, says the agents can appoint somebody else. And the Sefer is Rabbi Yossi, says the agents can't appoint somebody else. So how do we understand this Mishnah? So Abaye says, first approach, Kula Rabbi Meir here. The whole Mishnah is like Rabbi Meir, who says, Mili Mimser L'Shliach, the agents can appoint somebody else. Why in the latter case can they not? Hachav Mayaskina and Delo Amar Tenu. So Abaye says that when it says in the Seifa that it's not right, that the Ksiva is not writing, unless he says it directly, it's because he didn't just say to new, he said write it and give it. So since the husband specifically said in the latter case that you need to write it, therefore, if he didn't ask the sofer himself to write it, the get is not kosher, because he said specifically, I want you to write it and to give it. However, if he said to them, just give it, but not write it and give it, then they could ask somebody else. That's what Abaye says. If the Sefer is talking about where they added the word kisvu to new. If that's the case, well, then that's what our Mishnah should have said, unless they said just give it and not write it and give it. So therefore, Gemara gives a second answer. No, the latter case where it's no good is where they didn't say it in front of three people. They only said it to two. And in this case, where they just said it to two people, where a mayor would admit that if he said to new, just to new, and even though agents can appoint somebody else, nevertheless, in this case, he didn't make them a bezdin. And so therefore, they don't have the authority to appoint somebody else to write it. And so therefore, in the Seifa, it just, we're not talking about where he says to new, because there's only two people there. And so therefore, they don't have the ability to ask somebody else to write it. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, actually, he should have said until he asked three, then they can appoint somebody else. Elakua Rabbi Yossi. So the second approach is saying the whole Mishnah is not Rabbi Meir, but the whole Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi, who says, Mili lo mimser l'shech, you can't appoint somebody else. Well, then if that's the case, how come in the first case it's okay? What's it? So what's the reason in the second case? If that's the case, so why in the ratio do we say that in the first clause do we say it's okay? What's the reason the ratio that they can't ask the sofer to write it unless he said to new, just to new? Because he didn't say imru in the ratio, and so therefore he wouldn't have been able to ask him. But in the seifa he said the word imru, and so that's why it's okay. That even Rabbi Yossi would admit, if you say directly, you could say to somebody else, then even Rabbi Yossi would admit that the agents can appoint somebody else. So the Gemara says, well, then why didn't it say that? You have to say Imru. And furthermore, does Rabbi Yossi himself really admitted in the case where he said Imru? Latanan, Kasav Sofer Ve'ed Kosher. But we learned in the Mishnah, we had it 6 days ago, but this is going to be on 86b, the Mishnah, that if the Sofer writes it and the witness, Kasav Sofer Ve'ed, if a scribe and a witness write it, it's kosher. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, what does it mean that the sofer writes it? It doesn't mean the sofer writes it. Chasam sofer shaninu. It means if the sofer signs it. Amar Rav Chisda masnisim money. Our Mishnah must be Rabbi Yossi, who says mili lo mimser l'shiach, says you can't appoint somebody else because the Isach Daitach Moder Rabbi Yossi ba'omer Imru. And if you would say Rabbi Yossi would say that you could appoint somebody else. If you say Imru, nafak minei churba, then a terrible thing would happen. The zimnin da Amru. Because sometimes you'll say to the two people, and one of them is, and then they'll say, Imru was sofer v'yichto, go tell the scribe to write it, uponi v'yichtamu, and the other people to sign it, mishum kisufa the sofer, because the scribe will be so embarrassed, they'll be afraid to embarrass the scribe by asking him not to sign it. And so they're going to be embarrassed, and they're going to ask the scribe to sign it. The husband didn't write it. And so therefore it must be that our Mishnah, that Rabbi Yossi doesn't say Imru. So therefore, we don't want to say that Rabbi Yossi allows it in a case of Imru. He also says you can't appoint him, the person. So it must be a Machavar to Reisha and Meir of a Sefer Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara says we have no choice but to say the Reisha is Rabbi Meir and the Sefer of that Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi. Then the Gemara says Rav Ashi Amar. Actually, Kula Rabbi Yossi. The whole Mishnah is like Rabbi Yossi, who says Mili will mimser l'shliach. So if that's the case, why in the Reisha is it okay? The Lomi by a Kamar, and it's a Lomi by a Mishnah. Lomi by a Echad Lo Amar Tenu. Not only in a circumstance where the husband doesn't just say to Tenu, give it, but he also says Kisvu, do we say that you can't ask somebody else to write it? Elafiu Amar Tenu. Well, but even if he says just give it, he can't ask somebody else to write it. And not only in the circumstance where he didn't say it to three people. Even if he said to three people, well, it doesn't help. And even if he says Imru, it's also not acceptable. And according to Rabbi Yossi and Tanya, Kavasi to Rav Ashi, and we have a brayso that supports Rav Ashi, because what do we learn? We learned in the brayso, Kasim Sofer Lishma, V'chasmu Eidim Lishma. Let's say the witnesses. We have a brayso like Rav Ashi, Kasim Sofer Lishma. Let's say the scribe writes it Lishma for the right reason. V'chasmu Eidim Lishma, and the witnesses sign Lishma. Afal pi shekasvu v'chasmu v'nasnu hulo. Even though they shekasvu, that even though under these circumstances that they wrote it for him and they signed it and they gave it to the husband, v'nas nula, and the husband gave it to her, the get is going to be disqualified. It's going to be, in this case, disqualified until they hear directly from the scribe saying to write it and the witnesses to sign it. And what does it mean, Yishmeu? So it's when it says Yishmu, it's coming to exclude the position of even who says Rabbi Yossi says in a case where the husband says, you tell him to write it. It's not acceptable because you need to hear directly from the husband to write it. And also to exclude the position of Rav Kahana Marav, who says that through writing, it's acceptable. And we say that this price says it's not acceptable. Okay, we'll stop the recording here. And God willing, we'll do the